This is one of the earliest Egyptian artifacts, the so-called Libyan palette, made at the dawn of pharaonic history. It shows various fortified towns, each labelled within its ramparts. The other side bears the emblem of Tehenu, a word describing a land and people from the Western Desert. From the very beginning, the Nile state imagined a contested frontier. Nearly 2,000 years later, the contest continued. Egyptian pharaohs of the 19th and 20th dynasties took note of their western neighbours and clashed with powerful Libyan tribal confederations. Egyptian records from the Late Bronze Age describe tribes like the Meshwesh and the Libu raiding the Nile Delta. The very name Libya derives from the Libu people, one of the tribes visible in large state inscriptions in Egypt, and the name stuck in regional discourse for all peoples west of the Nile Valley. By the Iron Age, we group these under the ethno-linguistic term Berber, or Amazigh in their language. In their encounters, the Berbers were often seen as fierce outsiders, and pharaonic texts portray the Libyans as especially resistant to Egyptian rule. Linguistic evidence places the Berber branch within the Afro-Asiatic family, alongside Egyptian, Semitic, Cushitic, Chadic, and others. One notable development from the Bronze Age is the introduction of the horse into North Africa. The horse and chariot was foreign to the earlier Saharan pastoral culture, but came into Egypt with the Hyksos. They became common sometime around 1200 BCE, and horses spread to Libya, perhaps via trade or captured from Egyptians. We see engravings and paintings of horse-drawn chariots and mounted horses crossing desert landscapes. The art often shows small, stick-like human figures driving the chariots. The horse's arrival was revolutionary, opening the desert in new ways. Unlike oxen, horses could travel swiftly between oases. By harnessing teams of horses to chariots, desert chiefs gained mobility for warfare and long-distance forays. Egyptian records don't describe Libyan religion in this period, but they do depict them as heavily tattooed or skin-painted. Egyptian tomb paintings from the 18th and 19th dynasties show Libyan chiefs and women with patterns on their bodies and limbs. The same Egyptian depictions show Libyans wearing feathers in their hair, fringed garments and ornaments, carrying bows, spears, and throwing sticks. The iconic feather headcrest worn by Libyan warriors, often a plume atop a headband, may have had ritual meaning or signified membership or rank in a particular tribe. Some scholars think it was an insignia of the Meshwesh tribe, and while this is speculative, it is clear that warfare and raiding was becoming prominent by the Late Bronze Age. The Late Bronze Age was a tumultuous time across the Mediterranean, an era of Bronze Age collapse, mass migrations, and the Sea Peoples' invasions. North Africa was not isolated from these events. Pharaoh Merneptah and Ramses III describe battles against coalitions of invading Libyans, often allied with Sea Peoples. The Egyptians defeated them, recording heaps of Libyan dead. The droughts afflicting the Mediterranean may have also hit Libya, suggesting these were not mere raids, but attempts at migrations or resettlements. From these accounts we glean much about late Bronze Age Libyan society. They appear as tribal confederations capable of mustering thousands of fighting men. The Meshwesh and Libu were led by hereditary chieftains, styled as great chiefs in Egyptian texts. These Libyan chieftains would soon found dynasties in Egypt itself, which you can check out in an earlier episode. The Libyan pharaohs of the 22nd and 23rd dynasties traced their ancestry to Meshwesh mercenaries settled in Egypt's delta. Shoshenq himself, founder of Dynasty 22, came from a line of Meshwesh great chiefs. Meanwhile, to the east across the Mediterranean, a seafaring people were rising who would transform North Africa's destiny. Originating from the crowded city-states of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos in the Levant, the Phoenicians had become renowned sailors and merchants by the end of the Bronze Age. After 1200 BCE, as the old empires collapsed, Phoenician mariners began venturing ever farther west in search of trade and resources. Their small ships rode the sea lanes in daring voyages loaded with purple dye, glass, and exotic wares, seeking new markets. They were particularly lured by the promise of precious metals, the tin and silver of the western Mediterranean. By the 11th century, Phoenician explorers began to make landfall on the African coast, encountering the indigenous Berber population. According to later Greek and Roman traditions, the Phoenicians negotiated with local chiefs for permission to set up small trading posts. These encounters enter the realm of legend in the story of Queen Dido. As the tale goes, Dido fled her murderous brother in Tyre and arrived by ship on the African shore in the 9th century BCE. There she met a local Berber chieftain, often named King Yabas in later sources, who granted her as much land as could be covered by an ox hide. In a now famous bit of Phoenician cunning, Dido cut a leather ox hide into thin strips and laid them out to encircle the large Bersa hill, claiming a sizable tract for her people. This clever bargain, legend says, marked the foundation of the city of Carthage. The tale is of course not literal, but symbolizes how the newcomers gained a foothold by coexisting with the Berbers through mutual agreements rather than brute force. Outside of such legends, even before Carthage, the earliest known Phoenician colony was Utica, traditionally considered to be the first Phoenician colony founded in North Africa. Ancient Greek and Latin writers placed Utica's founding around 1101, but these were most likely just scouts or traders. Digs point to a later foundation in the 900s or 800s. Utica's strategic location made it a convenient port on the route from the Levant to the Strait of Gibraltar and the Atlantic Ocean. Utica's name means Old Town, hinting that it was already venerable by the time Carthage, or New Town, was founded. Utica was undoubtedly the critical early Phoenician bridgehead in Africa, facilitating trade in Mediterranean tin and other commodities that linked North Africa to far-flung markets, eventually perhaps even as far as Britain in northern Europe. Over the ensuing centuries, Phoenician sailors established dozens of small trading posts and colonies along the North African coast, always within a day or two's sail of each other. Later records speak of over 300 colonies and settlements founded by Phoenicians in the Maghreb, likely an exaggeration, but among these were ports that would grow into important cities. Gadir in the far west, present-day Cadiz, the gateway to the Atlantic, Motia on Sicily, Tharos on Sardinia, and Leptis and Tripoli on the Libyan coast. Everywhere they went, the Phoenician newcomers sought safe harbours and cooperated with indigenous Berbers, who provided valuable trade goods from Africa's interior. North African Berber chiefs and merchants found it profitable to exchange their products for Phoenician wares, wine, and oils. As more Phoenician settlers arrived, they began to displace some of the indigenous population from prime coastal sites. Over the next few centuries, the descendants of the Phoenician settlers had formed a distinctive culture, essentially a blend of Levantine Phoenician elements with local influences. They became known as Western Phoenicians, the Punic people. For those who don't know, our channel tries to share history from all over the world, but have never done ad reads or spoken to advertisers. All we ask is to subscribe if you enjoy these historical journeys, and if possible, consider becoming a member, and we can finish this project together. According to the account by Roman poet Virgil, after Carthage's founding, Dido and her Tyrian followers built Carthage with astonishing speed, finding favourable omens, like the head of a horse, a symbol of conquest. When the Assyrian Empire conquered Tyre and the Levant in the mid-600s, Carthage effectively became independent, no longer just a distant outpost of the Phoenician homeland. Early Carthage was ruled by kings from elite clans, like the Maghreb dynasty. Like back in Tyre, they adopted a system where the king didn't have absolute power, but shared governance with a group of elders. Over the course of the 600s to 500s, Carthage orchestrated a loose network of colonies, vassal cities, and allies, spanning coastal North Africa, southern Iberia, and islands like Sardinia and Sicily. Under the Maghanids, the city's strategic focus was not outright territorial conquest, but rather control of trade. Soon, Carthage had emerged as the dominant naval power in the western Mediterranean, its merchant fleets and warships outmatching any local rivals. But Carthage's ascendance did not go unchallenged. The Greek city-states were simultaneously expanding their colonial reach, and by the late 6th century, the two spheres collided. Initial skirmishes gave Carthage a foothold in western Sicily, protecting old Phoenician cities against Greek expansion. Inevitable clashes soon followed as Greeks and Carthaginians pushed west. Around 540, Carthage joined with the Etruscans to halt the advance of the Phocaeans, Greek colonists in Corsica. A treaty with the nascent Rome kept them out of any Punic sea lanes, giving Carthage supremacy over the western Mediterranean. As Carthage's territorial ambitions increased, many Berbers in these coastal zones were assimilated, turned into tenant farmers or serfs working Punic estates. These Berbers were gradually integrated into the Carthaginian economy. Some served as soldiers, notably the famed Numidian cavalry, others as labourers, though they lacked political power under the Punic aristocracy. Still, beyond the immediate orbit of Carthage, the Berber tribes remained essentially autonomous. In the 630s, the Greeks had founded the city of Kyrene, or Cyrene, and this prompted nearby Libyan tribes to organize. When Greek influence grew in that area, the native Libyans even put themselves under the protection of the Egyptian pharaoh Apries for help, though this led to a disastrous battle of Irata, where the Egyptian army was annihilated by the Greeks. But it indicates that Berber leaders were diplomatically savvy and were seen as distinct political actors among the Egyptians, Greeks, and Carthaginians. The early Berbers had even developed their own writing system, the Libyco-Berber script, most likely adapted from the Punic alphabet. By the dawn of the Mediterranean's classical era, North Africa was a mosaic of cultures and polities. Carthage, the great new city of Dido, stood as the wealthiest city-state in Africa, dominating by both navy and merchant ship. The vast inland territories stayed with the Berbers, who had not been conquered, retaining their freedom in the mountains, plains, and deserts beyond the narrow Punic coastal zone. Along the far western coast, the Mori, ancestors of the later Mauritanian kingdom, held sway, while closer to Carthage, the Numidians, later divided into Massiliae and Massicili, roamed with their herds. Inland were a looser confederation called the Gaetuli, semi-nomadic pastoralists, and far to the south in the desert fringe, the Garamantes were developing oasis strongholds and would rise in the Fezzan region by the 5th century BCE. A Greek observer in the 5th century might marvel that on this southern shore of the Mediterranean, Libyans and Phoenicians lived as neighbours, sometimes trading, sometimes skirmishing, always aware of each other's might. In the centuries to follow, these relationships would deepen, as Numidian kings like Massinissa and Carthaginian generals like Hannibal charted North Africa's destiny. In the Mediterranean, both the Greeks and Carthaginians would soon have to contend with another growing power. According to Virgil, after the fall of Troy, Trojan hero Aeneas lands on Carthage's shore and is greeted by Queen Dido. With some godly intervention, they fall madly in love. But the Numidian king, Iarbas, who had greeted Dido on her arrival, also fell in love, but was spurned by the queen. Angered, he prays to mighty Jupiter, and the king of gods sends Mercury to remind Aeneas of his destiny in a land to the north. Aeneas prepares to leave, but is caught by Dido. As he sails away, Dido places his gifts on a pyre to burn, and she takes her own life on it with Aeneas' sword. Driven by the god's command, the Trojans sailed on, and Aeneas would become ancestor to Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome. But with Dido's last breath, she cast a curse that Carthage and the future sons of Aeneas would be enemies forever.